Hello everyone and welcome. Have you ever thought about roasting your own coffee at home? Financially, it can be a great way to save money as unroasted green coffee beans typically cost about half the amount of roasted beans from your local cafe. But it's also a great way to just be more involved in your daily cup of coffee. You get to decide what beans you buy from what country, and you determine the roast level, whether it's light, medium, dark. Well, I've recently decided to take this on myself, and I wanted to share with you some of the research that I did, showing you the different ways you can do it, especially at different price points. I'll let you know what I settled on and bought for home roasting, as well as pass on some resources that were helpful for me. So, getting right into it, starting at potentially $0, you can use a baking sheet or pan. I don't really recommend these methods though, because there's sort of a basic requirement in roasting that you need to continuously move the beans around in order to evenly roast them. If you don't, you're likely to have some beans that come out at different roast levels. Some will be very dark, some will be very light, and that just won't produce a good cup of coffee. Now, of course, if you are set on getting in as cheap as possible, there are a few ways to give it your best shot. You could constantly shake the beans in a pan with a whisk, or periodically take the beans out of the oven and move them around. This takes more effort than it would be worth for me, but it's definitely not a bad place to start when you just want to try it out. The next level up can cost you about $30 to $40, very inexpensive, and that is popcorn poppers. You've really got two kinds you should be looking at. The first is air poppers. These are electric, plugged into an outlet, and they apply heat to the beans. And importantly, they provide airflow, which allows the beans to continue moving inside the popper. You do have to use smaller batches though, because if you use too many beans, the air in these poppers can get a little overwhelmed and they won't be able to move the beans around adequately. I'd recommend looking for this one called the Nostalgia Popcorn Maker. There's a company in the US called Sweet Maria's who is well known in the home roasting community, and they've tested a bunch of models and found that this one does the best job overall. The second choice you have is a Stovetop popcorn machine, and for this one you want to look up the original Whirly Pop. You put it on the stove, which provides the heat, and you agitate the beans with the crank mechanism. I've seen some good roasts from both of them, and for the money they're just a great way to get started in the hobby. You just need to know what your limits are, as you won't have much control over temperature or airflow on these machines. These are really just a way to put the beans in and have a sort of hands-off approach, pulling the beans once they reach your desired color. Now we are getting to the machines that are actually designed for roasting coffee at home, and these range quite a bit in price. For a mid-tier category, let's quickly go over two companies, Fresh Roast and Baymore. Fresh Roast is an air roaster using very hot air to roast the beans inside the chamber. Depending on the model, they can cost you around $300 to $400. You get control over fan speed and temperature from a setting of 0 to 9. You can easily see the beans as they roast in the glass chamber, and the top portion collects the chaff. That's the parchment that comes off green beans as you roast them. This makes things very easy to collect, dispose of, and clean. Baymore is probably the most popular roaster that we'll look at, and they really cater to everyone. Coming in at $500 to $600, you basically get an electric drum roaster, so the beans sit in a cage that rolls around and rotates inside. The whole thing kind of looks like a microwave, but they're quiet. They've got smoke suppression technology, so it makes it nice and easy to roast indoors. And you can either run on their pre-programmed modes, or you can run on manual, which allows you to control the temperature, the rotation of the drum, and the time of the roast. The last group we will look at before I talk about which one I chose is the real investment level of home roasting. This is where you start to get into the $1,000 to $3,000 range. I won't go over too much of their specifics here, but two of the big names that stood out to me are Hot Top and Bullet. These are going to roast larger batches and give you way more control over some roasting variables. They also typically have cooling trays which allow the beans to cool down very quickly, and this is very important for roasting coffee no matter what machine you choose, so I'm actually going to talk about it a little bit later as well. At this price point, the machines will also usually have the exciting feature of connecting to a roasting software like Artisan or Cropster. This is where you really start to dig into the hobby, looking at bean temperatures, and building your own roast curves. They are a big step up in cost, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend them if it's your first time roasting. They can be more intimidating to approach and have a steep learning curve. So which one did I go with? I decided to go with the Fresh Roast SR540. I wanted more control than the popcorn machines, but I also felt that the Baymore didn't give me much more for the increase in price. The ones over $1,000 were outside my budget, and I didn't really want to start with anything too advanced. So I really think that the Fresh Roast is probably one of your best options for under $500 and producing great results. Before I end this video, there are a few other costs to keep in mind. An important one is a way to cool the beans externally from the machine. As I said before, you need to bring the temperature of the beans down very quickly after roasting, or they can begin to taste very baked and bready. Most of the machines here will not do an adequate job on their own, even if they're advertising themselves as having a cooling function. So I recommend buying a mesh colander and dumping your beans in right away. You can shake the beans around or grab a whisk to help move the beans and keep them cool. I also highly recommend grabbing a fan and blowing some air through them. Then there's the cost of the green beans. There will be some online shops depending on where you live, and those can be great options to get a large selection and have them shipped to you, but I'd also highly recommend asking your favorite local roaster if they'll sell you green beans. That's what I'm doing. There's a minimum £2 purchase that they want, but the beans typically cost around $8 to $11 a pound, and by buying from a local roaster that I trust, I can avoid making a mistake by buying from an online retailer who might have some dull coffees mixed in with the good ones. So that's really it. I will leave some resources in the description of the video, some things that I found helpful, some websites and communities that I would recommend joining if you want to get into the hobby or ask some questions from people who are more experienced. Let me know in the comments below if you have one of these roasters and what your experience has been so far. Please also consider subscribing for weekly content, and I hope to see you again next week. Have a great day.